Welcome everyone to our latest short talk. Today we're joined by a panel of editors of prominent journals with whom we will discuss key aspects of publishing and engaging with audience, sports audience, and more in general. I'm very proud of Sport&EU for organizing this type of event that aims to be helpful not only for early career researchers, but for all researchers that want to publish in academic journals. The idea was actually to try and be available and be helpful for everyone. Sport&EU, for those of you who don't know about it, is an association that was founded in 2005 with the aim of promoting comparative and interdisciplinary research on sports, on Europe and the European Union, all widely defined. The association has always been committed to support the development of new generation of academics, researchers, and practitioners. And we will mention later that the association runs an annual conference. And if you have not come across that, is also a good way for you to be engaged with that association, with this association. Right, to give us insights on publishing academic journal. Actually, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Andrea Cattaneo, and I am a member of the board of Sport&EU, as well as a senior lecturer in sports law at Edgehill University in the United Kingdom. But more importantly, today we are joined by three editors from prominent academic journals. We have Roberta Guerrina, who is a professor in the School of Sociology, Politics and International Studies at the University of Bristol. Roberta is an expert in EU gender politics and policies, and she has published in the area of Brexit, women, peace and security, work-life balance, identity politics, and the idea of Europe. Roberta is the editor of the Journal of Common Market Studies. We're also joined by Dr. Kirsten Hallmann, who's a senior lecturer at the German Sports University and has an interest in sports participation and management of sports organization. Kirsten sits on the editorial board of the European Sports Management Association, and she's a co-editor of the International Journal of Sports Policy and Politics. And finally, we have Mark James, who is a professor of sports law at Manchester Metropolitan University, where he's also the director of research in the Manchester Law School. Mark is one of the UK leading experts on sports law and Olympic law, a member of the advisory panel to the Independent Football Ombudsman, and the editor-in-chief of the International Sports Law Journal, who is published by Springer and Asser Press. As you can tell from this introduction, the idea behind the webinar is to hear from editors of two journals that are more specialistic and related specifically to our membership, and one journal that has a much more broader scope in relation to the European Union more in general, if we want. So without further ado, I'm going to start the conversation. We're going to leave some time for questions at the end, but if you want in the meantime to post your question in the chat, we will make sure to try and answer all of the questions as best as the editors can. So the first theme that I like our panel to discuss is essentially what are you looking for in submitted articles as editor. I'm moving in alphabetical order, but I will start first by looking at the more niche areas. So if we start with you, Kirsten, what is it that you're looking for as an editor in your specific journal?
Well, first of all, we are obviously checking whether the author's contribution is within the aims and the scope of the journal, because it's a journal on sport policy and politics. So this is already, although you said it's a niche journal, but obviously several issues related to sport in general are policy issues. So issues that we can look at from an economic perspective, from a management perspective, from a legal perspective, maybe even from a historical and sociological perspective, could be related to policy issues and governance of sports and sport organizations. So this is the first thing. I also have to say that not everyone is managing to fulfill this. So some are completely writing about medical issues, not related to sport policy. So therefore, this is definitely not within the scope of the journal. So this is like the first thing we as editors are checking. Another important part and issue is originality and novelty. So this is all about the study's relevance, contribution to policy governance on the one side, so contribution to practice. On the other hand, also the contribution to theory and knowledge creation. And a third big issue is methodological rigor. This relates to no matter what kind of study you conduct. So if it's a conceptual study, a systematic literature review, again, there are certain areas in terms of rigor which you should follow. Same applies to all sorts of qualitative studies and quantitative studies. So this is also something that should be documented as transparently as possible. So yeah, these are like the core three things we are probably looking at, and I assume this might be similar with Mark and Roberta.
Thank you, Kirsten. What about you, Mark? Have you any difference in terms of the International Sports Law Journal?
I think Kristen summed it up. What the more general issues are there, that you're looking for something that first of all is within the scope of the journal, and likewise we've had a number of pure medical or biomechanical articles recently, which is fine if you're then going to relate it to a legal framework. But if it's a pure scientific paper, then it's really going to be out with what we're looking for in the journal. So as long as it's got something to do with law, then we will be prepared to look at it. We need that legal framework for the journal. We definitely need originality. We're looking for new, interesting pieces of work. If you're building on other people's work, make sure it's clear within the article that you are, instead of trying to claim it for yourself. And I think a key issue as well is making sure you read the submission guidelines. Do not multiply submit, and also do not resubmit the same piece elsewhere. I'm also an editor of the Entertainment and Sports Law Journal, and we had the same piece submitted to us by the same person yesterday and today on the two different journals. There's two reasons why you shouldn't do it. In niche areas like ours, you will often find that people know each other, but also more importantly, we had an article late last year that was submitted to us in a completely unchanged version when it had already been submitted to another journal. We had no idea. We sent it out for review, and the reviewers came back saying, we've already rejected this, and we're not even going to look at this one this time because it's not been changed. So I think when you've got to be aware, and systems are improving as well, that, and apologies for this being a sort of negative, almost telling off to begin with, but it is really important that you make sure that the work that you're submitting is done appropriately and follows those guidance and those rules. We find those multiple submissions often come from US scholars who are more used to doing the multiple submissions in the North American system, but increasingly we are finding people submitting multiply, and also this notion of not revising work. If you have had a piece rejected and you've got comments on it, then do not resubmit that piece until you've amended it. You might not like what they've said, you might think that yours is really good, but it does simply run the risk that the same people will review it, particularly in an area like sports law, where you're talking about a relatively limited pool of reviewers worldwide. So it's that would be my big warning to people. On the plus side, make sure it's good. make sure it's interesting, make sure it follows the house style as well. If it doesn't follow the house style, it'll come straight back to you saying, this looks really interesting, put it in the house style and we might look at it further.
Very good. A very interesting point about resubmission, especially for those of the listeners that might just have approached the publication of work. Roberta, with you, the question is slightly different in the sense that one of the challenges for our membership is to try and break the barrier of their expertise, which by nature is relatively niche, and trying to get into a more mainstream type of academic journal and communicate with a broader audience. Do you have any recommendation or any views as to what particular aspects you would be looking for?
So as someone who publishes on gender, and having spent most of my career, certainly at the start of my career, publishing in gender journals, and finding that I was only ever talking to the same people who also only publish in gender journals. I had a bit of an epiphany moment about 15 years ago when I actually thought, if we're going to make any change in terms of the discipline, but also more broadly, the way that we think about the EU as a gender equality actor, we need to publish in mainstream journals, right? And actually engage with a wider audience. And I have to say, there has been a qualitative shift, certainly in JCMS and many other mainstream EU studies journals in the last 10 years. Partly has been an active kind of transition in which editors are looking for a more diverse set of submissions to actually reflect the heterogeneity of the discipline itself. But also people are much more prepared to engage with mainstream scholarship. So what happens when you publish in a niche area and then want to apply? And I would actually say sports and the EU, sports and politics and so on is not so niche. The Women and Equalities Committee is currently doing an inquiry on misogyny in sports in the UK. So it's actually breaking through these kind of boundaries and becoming much more mainstream as a field of analysis. What we are looking for as in terms of our submissions is actually they speak to the core area that is the focus of our journal, which is European integration. And it's not enough to use case studies of states from the EU. So you could submit something with Italy, Spain, and the UK, or no longer the UK, and France as case studies. But if it doesn't speak to providing us with a better understanding of how this shapes European integration, it may be thus rejected from our kind of pool because it doesn't contribute to the debate about the EU and European integration. So that's one of the key things that we're looking from submissions, right? We are actually, JCMS is a really good place for colleagues to submit to, especially if you're trying to break into mainstream journals, because it is interdisciplinary. So we are looking, so we publish economics paper, we publish social policy papers, we publish law paper, we publish theoretical papers, we publish IR papers, right? But the common thread is that they all seek to advance debates about the nature of the European Union, what it does, and the process of European integration. So one of the things that I would say to most authors is have a look at your bibliography. If you don't cite any journals about the EU, it doesn't have to be JCMS, it could be Journal of European Integration, JEP, EU Politics, and so on. But if you don't publish, well, if you don't cite any journals that treat arguments specific to the EU, are you really contributing to the debates around the EU? Which is actually what we're looking to do, is to expand and contribute to the debates around what we understand the EU to be. So that's the one thing that we would really be looking for in terms of authors and submissions. You might find, and actually to pick up on a couple of points made by Mark and Kristen, is that you might find that you get a reject and resubmit kind of response from the editors. So we're using this fairly frequently. If we see a piece that we think is really interesting, it can make a contribution, It is original, but perhaps it's not as rigorous as we would like it to be. It doesn't actually speak to the core debates as we would like the piece to be, or the manuscript to do. And then we'll send it back with a note from the editors saying, we're really interested, but we're not going to send it out for review in this particular kind of iteration, because we'd really like you to speak to this kind of concerns that we have. So if editors are giving you that opportunity, I would say really take note of that advice, because it is intended to help you to submit a piece that is better and actually speaks to the journal where you're submitting and looking to publish. And that also speaks to the reviewers, right? So Mark is absolutely right. We regularly get pieces that have been submitted elsewhere, have been reviewed elsewhere, get submitted to us, and we're much broader church, I guess, in terms of the kind of submissions that we get, but we send it out to reviews, and it's a small world, right? Reviewers come back and say, I've already reviewed this twice, not going to look at this, right? Reviewers take time to actually review articles and manuscripts. They don't get paid to do this. So when they give you really good feedback, because it takes time to give feedback, please engage with it, because the intention is to actually make the papers better. In my experience, we've had probably a handful. I mean, so I've been co-editor now for coming up to 2 years. And we might have had a handful of reviewers that we thought, this is actually not great, so we'll look for someone else. But the vast majority of reviewers are great, and they actually care. So yeah, engage with the reviewers, because even if you don't get published in our journal, chances are you might find them again in your next submission.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Roberta. You mentioned a few points that I think are very interesting, and I'd like to pick on something that you alluded to, which is ensuring to access or to communicate with a wider audience. And in particular, this is obviously for those of you who are connected from the UK and work in academic universities and institutions in the UK, the issue of impact is something that you're all aware of. But in general, it is a concern and something that we should all be looking for to try and communicate to someone outside our normal readership. So I'd like the panel to tell me what they think about how would you ensure to communicate, how would author make sure that they can communicate to a wider audience and maybe to policymakers. So Kirsten, what do you think?
This goes a little bit beyond the publishing process and how to get published, definitely. I think it's important that you personally, as a researcher, actually build your own network. And this definitely starts if you're an early careers researcher, an early career academic, maybe still working on your PhD or right after your PhD, that you really present yourself and your studies at conferences. Yes, most conferences are mostly visited by academics, but plenty of conferences are also visited by practitioners. So people who are responsible for policymakers. I'm also a lot in sport management, so also sport managers are present, event managers are present. So it is really up to you to not just present in your common style your findings, but really try also to connect there. Use this opportunity to showcase your knowledge and how you actually produced evidence that policymakers, that all sorts of practitioners can easily implement. And yes, the journal article is one thing to showcase this. A presentation at a conference is another thing to showcase this. But you also have to take into consideration in today's world, not everyone is able to digest your 12-paper journal article. So most people will read the abstract only, maybe the introduction and the conclusion. This is also one reason why the abstract should be really spot on. And this is also one reason why most people go probably 1/4 of their writing time. I've just came across these statistics. It's devoted only to the introduction, because you really have to make your point. You really have to provide the rationale and the contribution of your study. So this is super important. But this is only one means. Other means are that you maybe produce some evidence briefs, for instance, that look more fancy, but this is what we can use easily on our own social media, on your institutional social media, to showcase these things. In my university, for instance, our communication team picks regularly one researcher, and they take one piece, and then I don't want to say they make it readable, but I think you get the point. They use rather popular language and write for the common man, for Joe Public or Jane Public. Besides, we are not doing it as a journal, but I know other journals are doing it. They ask authors to produce a 1-minute elevator pitch, showcasing in a video the key findings of their article. And even if if the journal does not offer this opportunity for you, why not doing it yourself and facilitating it through your institutional social media, for instance? So these are ways how you could increase your personal outreach, often via your institution, and these are also ways how you can communicate, or not communicate, but maybe start a conversation with policymakers.
Very interesting and a very good idea. Thank you, Kirsten. Mark, do you have any suggestions on your side?
A lot of what I was going to say, Kirsten's already mentioned. I think what you've got to be able to do with your paper is be able to produce 3 or 4 different versions of it. One is the paper that gets published. One is a shorter sort of 1,000, 1,500 word version maybe that can be on a blog, or a video version of it where you're just explaining what the highlights are. A policy brief where it's even shorter, and you've got to be able to tweet about it or put it on social media somehow. Can you actually distill it into a single tweet that people are going to read? Policymakers and politicians aren't even going to read the abstract. So what you need is something that is going to catch them instantly. They might then engage with the work. They might find that one of their people will read the longer version of it, but you need to hook them in by one of those other ways as well. So be prepared. If you think if that's what you want with your work, if you're trying to engage with policymakers, if you're trying to make it have that wider impact, remember that you need to write for those different audiences as well, because the 6,000 to 10,000 word highly analytical piece that you might write for the journal, as Kristen said, most people aren't even going to get past the abstract on that. Not because your work isn't interesting, but because they're either not interested in or don't want to go into that depth of detail that you're about to. So make sure that you can replicate it in shorter versions that keeps that essence and keeps it interesting. And linked to that, again, what Kirsten was saying about spending so much time on the abstract and the introduction, another key thing is, and I've seen this with a lot of people, particularly with articles and PhDs, don't do a big reveal. Tell us what the answer is at the outset. Don't spend the entire article building up to it, because you're either going to lose people or they're going to come up with a different answer. They're going to read through it and then they're going to come to the end of it and go, well, that's not what I was expecting. That's complete rubbish. And I'm either going to never look at it again, or I'm going to tell everybody else it's rubbish. Tell us what the answer is at the beginning. and then show us how you got to that answer, so that we're hooked in right from the start. Because then we want to know, if you've told us that big bang at the start, if you told us what the answer is, then it hooks people in to actually read the rest of it as to how you got there and what the interesting detail then is. So don't do a big reveal, and make sure that you are able to write for those different audiences. And if you can't, then try either co-author or use your institutions to help you. They do want to publish our work. A lot of time and effort is put into generating alt metrics now, not just citations. Is it getting out there? Get your university to help you. And the last point I'd say is as well, and this applies to everybody, not just the author, don't just like stuff on social media. Repost it or retweet it. It doesn't matter how many likes it gets. That might feel good for the author, but it always frustrates me when I see a journal will tweet out, or on other platforms it will send out to social media news item about a new article that's been published, and it gets 100 likes and 1 repost. That's no use to anybody. What it needs is those repostings to get out there. Start doing it yourselves and encourage everybody else to get out there, because otherwise it's not going to get a bigger audience. No one's trawling through your likes to find out what you actually liked. Get it reposted, get it retweeted, get it out there. Encourage your friends and your colleagues to do it as well, so that you can try and get as many people interested in your work as possible.
Thank you. I feel like we now need a whole session on social media just to cover some of these aspects. Very interesting. Thanks, Mark. Roberta, do you have any views on this? And before we started the webinar, you were talking about open access, and that is obviously another aspect of allowing a wider audience. What do you think of the general theme, and then what can you say about open access?
So a couple of things. Want to echo what's already been said. Nobody's going to read, no practitioner is going to read your full article. Okay, we just need to come to terms with that. And also, impact doesn't come from articles, okay, and academic publications. Impact is generated from the academic publication, so there has to be a link. But that's not impact. And even getting a practitioner to read it, that's not impact, right? So you actually need to change someone's behavior in order to have impact. So how do you do that? You can do that in a number of different ways. And again, that's probably a different conversation, right? But all too often, we make a mistake of confusing engagement and dissemination with impact. These are not the same, but you cannot have impact if you don't engage with practitioners and policymakers, and absolutely creating a easy read version of your paper so that you can circulate it to practitioners. That's the first step. On social media, I would say if you're not on LinkedIn, I would actually use LinkedIn. I think it seems to be a place to go now rather than Twitter or X. It seems to have remained fairly professional in the way that people engage with it. And Mark is absolutely right. The reposts on that generate kind of traffic. Make sure that you put in the link to your article and then make it open access. So as a segue into, if you want to reach people, it has to be open access. So we were talking before the webinar started about transformational agreements. These are really changing the way that publishers, or rather the business model that underpins academic publishing. Most of the people in this audience will be at institutions that have signed transformational agreements with various publishers. If you're not familiar with those, you need to get familiar with those, because what it means is that if you have a transformational agreement and you are the corresponding author, doesn't mean that you have to be the first named author, it doesn't matter. But as long as the corresponding author is at an institution with a transformational agreement, the article can be published open access, right? And this is going to be transformative for the reach of our work, because if it's behind a paywall, whereby people have to pay $40 to access your article, they're not going to read it. They might read the abstract, they might try to reach out to you on ResearchGate, if they even know that exists. They might try to reach out to you on LinkedIn if they can be bothered. But let's think about the friction that it takes. And if you want to engage with practitioners, they're time poor. I mean, we're time poor. They're really time poor. They have to work against incredibly quick deadlines. They don't have months to work on a brief, right? They may have a few days. So they'll go on Google Scholars, and whichever articles come up and are open access and easy to get hold of, as long as they're published in good journals, they're probably going to be the ones that they go for. So really think about where you publish, whether or not you can get it open access, and who you want to reach as part of that. Also discuss with the editorial team what they can do to promote your article, especially if for whatever reason it becomes topical. At JCMS, we had stuff on Ukraine before 2022, which had a little bit of kind of impact, but not a huge amount. And what we had to do as editorial team is go back through our archives and make sure that those articles, those earlier articles on Ukraine were not republished, but were promoted again, right? Because there is knowledge there that you still want to actually push. So it's not just the latest thing that has just been published. So you need to keep an eye on your, well, you have an eye on your own research. Make sure that when something happens and becomes topical, that you actually seek to center it. And in order to do that, use your institutional resources or use the editors. That's what we're also there for. Was there anything else that you want me to cover, Andrea? If my internet is still stable.
This is very, very interesting. So for those of you who are not based in the UK, there's a lot of pressure on academics to publish open access, which essentially means that they will need to liaise with their own institution to ensure that the journals that they aim to publish in is open access, which means that the institution will have to pay essentially a fee to ensure that that article will be available to the public in general. I'm not entirely sure if there is a similar pressure in other countries, in other institutions around the world. Kirsten, maybe you can give us a little insight into what is the approach of German universities in relation to this.
It's pretty similar. Obviously, we want people to read our research in Germany as well. And I think this also applies to many other countries. I'm working currently together with people from New Zealand, Australia, and Japan, and Finland, for instance. And it's the same everywhere. And then it's based on your country, what kind of agreements you have with the publishers. Sometimes if the agreement is not as you want it to be, obviously during a PhD, you think, oh my gosh, how can I raise 3,000 to 4,000 euros actually to get it open access if this is a requirement? That is definitely tricky, but as Roberta has pointed out, talk to your institution, ensure that you know the policy legislation that is ongoing in your country and how your institution is related to that. And I think Roberta gave a marvelous tip with a corresponding author. So this could be a good strategy, that you ensure that whoever serves as corresponding author, and I just want to highlight it again, the corresponding author does not need to be the first author. It can be the second, third, fourth, or anyone. So use that strategy maybe in case your institution does not have such an agreement with one of the publishers you want to publish with.
Yeah, so it looks that there is a lot of strategy work behind the idea of publishing. You need to identify a journal that will accept your type of publication because it falls within the scope of research that the journal is interested into, but also in terms of open access, and that will lead also to potential collaboration. One other aspect of the publication that we have already alluded to is the review process. And I'm wondering if one of you or all of you could illuminate us as to how to deal with the review process, especially if we're discussing of younger academic researchers. How do they have to deal with the review process and how to reply to reviews? Granted that no one will have a reviewer number 2 on their board, so I'm sure that that would not be the case. But what do you suggest, Mark?
First of all, once you've got the review, close it down and go and have a walk. And when you come back and read it, it won't be anywhere near as bad as you think it was first time around. Don't take it personally. That's probably the most important thing. Where reviewers are doing their jobs properly and appropriately, this is supportive, constructive criticism that is trying to make your article better. We as editors will often not pass on reviews that are bullying or abusive or simply just not doing their job properly. There's no point, and sometimes I will just park one of those reviews and maybe go out for an additional reviewer instead. Where you do feel that someone's being unduly critical, as I said, they might not be phrasing it in the best way, but what they're trying to do is make your article better. So almost all journals now, and particularly those that where the processes are becoming much more digitized now, will require some sort of document alongside your resubmission that states how you have addressed the comments of the reviewers. And that is absolutely key. Make sure that you've done it. Even if it means going through line by line, you literally say, you said this, I did this. You said this, I did this. But also don't be afraid, because that document will go to the editor first. Don't be afraid. If you think you're absolutely right and the reviewer isn't, or if they're trying to change your article into something it isn't, don't be afraid to say, I hear what reviewer 2 was saying, and I disagree with it for these reasons, and I would like to keep this bit as it is. That shows a degree of confidence in there, but obviously don't get into a slanging match with the editors and with the reviewers, and just saying, oh, reviewer 2 is wrong, so I'm not doing it. If you think that they are, tell us why. Or sometimes it might be, not everyone is going to be 100% expert on the reviewing team. It might be you think that they've missed a particular article or something else, and you'll say, well, actually, I've gone down this route. So don't be afraid in justifying your work, but that's going to be relatively rare. Most of the time, you're not going to get somebody who's being mean or horrible about your work. Engage with it. Take it as constructive criticism. Engage with it and explain how you've dealt with each of the points raised. It just makes the whole process so much easier if you can do that, because the editors will then be able to look at it and go, this person's clearly done the kind of thing that's asked of them. Then hopefully will be a very short process that sometimes it won't necessarily go back to the reviewers. If it's quite clear you've made minor amendments and you've done it all, we won't trouble the reviewers at all, because we can see that you've done it. If it needed more detailed amendments, again, show us. If you've explained how you've done it all properly, then when we ping it back to the reviewers, they'll just be able to say, yes, they've done exactly what I've asked here, and it's good to go. So that's the main bit of advice. Engage fully, engage in not in the first reaction to what might have been said. Do it coolly, calmly, do what's asked of you. And if you do, it's almost impossible not to publish it. Because if the reviewers have said it needs A, B, and C doing, and you come back and do A, B, and C, as far as we're concerned, then the experts that we've gone out to will now think it's okay.
Thank you,
Can
Mark.
I jump in, Andrea?
Yep.
I absolutely like to echo that. And don't take the reviewers for granted. We certainly have had at least a couple of manuscripts in which the reviewers went out to review to the same person 3 times. First iteration was minor amendments. came back, had done very few of those minor amendments, went back out to the reviewer. Reviewer came back, actually, they need to do what they've been told, major. So just that they actually understand. And then it goes out to the reviewer. They done something, but because JCMS covers quite a broad range of topics, and we're not experts in all of them, so we will have to go back to the reviewers, especially on methodological issues, right? And I thought, I'm not sure they've done what they were asked, but this is not my area of expertise. So I went back to the reviewer. Reviewer came back, and it was a very short and sharp review, which basically said reject. Is like, because they've not engaged with anything I've said in the previous 2 reviews, right? So on that occasion, I went back and I said, I'm sending you the review as it is from the reviewer, which is short and sharp. But you need to understand that unless you do this, we're interested in the topic, but unless you actually do this, we will not publish. And at that point, it will be a reject. So, and I think this is something that sometimes authors, because we're time poor, we don't take seriously the amendment process and the revision process as we should be. My advice would be, and this is the advice I give all my PhD students, when you get, the advice Mark gave you is to read it, close it, walk away, and come back. I would say maybe even a day later, not just after a walk. It will not read as bad. But also, once you've come back, get your author's manuscript, take the comments, and add these comments onto the manuscript in a Word document with comments at exactly which bit of the document they're referring to, right? So, and then you can actually start to have a conversation with the reviewer. So reviewer 1 said, here. What I understand is this, what I think I need to do to improve is that, what I don't agree with is this, and this is because, and here is the reference as to why I'm not going to change it, right? So if you do it that way, you're going to save yourself so much time. You're not going to keep those comments when you resubmit it, because otherwise you become identifiable, or you make sure that you anonymize the document. So if you want to keep the comments, but also when you write the letter to the editors, you can cut and paste those comments that you've written in the margins, and they become your response to the reviewers. So it takes a little bit of time to go through it, but that also means that you're engaging with the review process in a meaningful way. So yeah, and that kind of answers part of your question, Borja, about how do you deal with difficult reviewers, right? Or abusive reviewers. We don't, so some reviewers are not constructive, but they may have a point, and they help to kind of identify weaknesses in the article. So if that's the case, we will paraphrase. So we maintain the kind of feedback, but we don't send out abusive stuff. So for instance, we will not send out reviews that include this needs to be proofread by or by native English speaker, right? Because it makes all sorts of assumptions. But we will say this needs careful editing and proofreading. So it's about actually how you engage with that process as well. And if I certainly have dealt with at least 2 reviewers who were not constructive at all. And I felt as I was reading the reviews, they were very biased. So I emailed the author and said, I'm really sorry, we're going to have to take a little bit more time, but I need to find another reviewer. And I think this is in your best interest. So make sure that you do engage with that. The other thing that I would say is also, as authors, remember that editors are also people. And it's not pleasant to get abusive emails from authors either, or harassing emails. Most editors try to keep authors in the loop, depending upon how many submissions or hundreds of submissions you get per year. Sometimes some people slip through the net. Nobody ever minds getting an email or a reminder. People do mind getting abusive emails. So, and by the way, if you're going to use titles, make sure that you use the right titles. I'm demoted regularly. My co-editors never are. So think about how that works. So it's always, for me, quite often is Mrs. Garina, but it's always Professor Cardwell and Professor Brugge for Gabriel and Paul. So it's interesting how we engage.
Thank you, Roberta. Yeah.
But engagement is really the core here. Show appreciation towards the editor and the reviewers. Mark has already stressed this. It's in their own time. It's basically voluntary work. We don't get paid for it. And yes, it takes effort to go consistently through a manuscript, although we are all experienced, and provide a constructive feedback. So you should also, in your response to comments, reflect this and mirror this. So engage, as Mark and Roberta have already pointed out, but also make life as easy as possible for a second review. So really produce a table or a point where you have, like, in one column the number maybe of the comment, then the comment, and then your response, and you outline the action you've taken, and then in a last comment maybe page number and line number, really highlighting and make it easy for the reviewer to identify the changes in the manuscript. To make it as easy as possible, and maybe also to save at least a little bit of their time. There is absolutely no need to copy-paste the changes you've implemented into the manuscript. There are people who really copy-paste the new paragraph from the manuscript in the response to comments document. Not needed, because it's already in the manuscript. And this just inflates pages in the response to comments. So it's a more technical thing, but I know that many reviewers are, sorry for using this language, are really getting mad when they're really these long paragraphs just copy paste from the manuscript. Make your point, provide a rationale why you took action or why you did not take any action. There might be a good reason for you to stick to your initial argument. And yes, it's really important, this has been outlined before, to answer to every single comment. Don't leave a comment out. Many reviewers provide often in the beginning a sort of summary. Also copy-paste that summary in the response to comments and provide at least 1 or 2 lines in regard to that, and usually afterwards they have some more specific comments. And if you don't understand something, ask for clarification. Reviewers are there to help you, to make you better, to make your manuscript better. Ask for clarification. The same thing if you have some project deadlines, if you have a lot of marking to do, feel free to reach out to the editors and ask for an extension. Usually we provide that extension so that you have more time to prepare the revised manuscript. And be aware that going now towards a little bit of a different direction, Andrea, but be aware when you submit a manuscript that you may be also asked to review for the journal, because at the moment I think everyone is short of reviewers. Sometimes we are asking 7, 8 reviewers until we get a positive response. So everyone is busy, and as I said earlier, or we all said earlier, it's voluntary work. So it's important that we all chip in. This is how we sustain our system. So yes, also do your share of reviewing, and maybe, you know, when you get your first invite and you're unsure, reach out to the editor. Ask the editor and maybe explain it's your first thing, you're not really sure whether you should accept or not. Maybe there's some advice. Most of us really can point you towards certain papers that provide a good outline how you actually could start with the first review. And be trusted. We would always match or we always try to match younger scholars with older scholars and more experienced scholars. This is also something. Another thing, maybe for you, how we pick reviewers. Definitely on expertise, but sometimes it's based on their research area, and then we add maybe someone who's good at that methodology. And this is why sometimes you may get contrasting reviews.
Thank you, Kirsten. I thought I was asked to review things because of my expertise, but maybe I'm the 7th or the 8th that has been asked. So humbling. Right, I'm aware that we're approaching the end of this session. So while I'm waiting for any questions from the chat, and as Borja as a reminder, you can use the chat to ask questions. I'm going to ask one last question to the panel, and this came from our membership, because sometimes obviously our membership is international and they might want to produce their work in different languages. So are you aware of the policy in relation to archiving articles and translating them in other languages? Should we start with Mark?
It will probably depend to a certain extent on whether you are covered by one of the open access agreements to begin with. If you are, and our journal's on Springer, if you're part of the open access agreement, you can basically do what you like with it as long as you reference it appropriately and say where it was originally published. So that's the easiest thing. And so if you wanted to reuse it, if you want to translate it, that's fine. And I think you'll find for a lot of the major publishers, that will be the case, as not where it's open access. Where it's not open access, there's usually a link somewhere within the proofreading stage, I think it is, that you can click on that will say, what are my options for republication of this? And and there will be incredibly detailed information. Sometimes I think on the Springer platform, you just have to fill in what it is and what you want to do with it, and then ping it off, and then you'll get a response as to what you're allowed to do with that particular article. But once it's down the open access route, it's easier. If it's not open access and published more traditionally, there's usually limitations, but those are becoming less so, and you're usually able to archive either on an institutional archive or a personal website, as long as it's not for commercial use. You can then put it on an institutional repository or on your personal website in whatever language you want it to be in. You could use SSRN or something like that as well. But there's usually an embargo, particularly with law journals and with English language law journals. It's usually an embargo of 12 months before you're able to do it. So open access, depending on what the actual license is, I think Springer is Creative Commons YB, which is one of the most widely usable ones once it's gone through the publication process. For anything else, you're probably looking for a 12-month embargo before you can do anything with it.
Thank you very much, Mark. Roberta, Kirsten, do you have anything to add to this? Right.
I added the same comment in the chat as well. So yeah, it's this is where open access becomes really, really important. So get familiar with it if you're not already.
Just on that open access point, if you go, it might not be on the journal. I don't think it is on our journal. It's not very easily findable you can click on and it gives you the option. But if you go on to if you just put in for us like Springer open access or Wiley open access, you'll basically go to the publisher's homepage. It'll take you through. On Springer, I looked earlier, you can follow a series of links. You can find out if your country's covered, if your institution's covered, if the journal's covered. It takes 2 minutes just to click through and just double check which it is. So most of Europe and a large part of North America and North Africa is covered on Springer, various agreements. The ISLJ is, if your country is one of those that signed up to the agreements, the ISLJ is one of those that is within those agreements. But just as I said, type in the name of the publisher and open access. It'll take you to what's covered, which countries are covered by the agreements, and which journals are covered by those agreements.
Right. Thank you very much. Now we are at the 1 hour mark. So if there are no pressing questions from the audience, and I've not seen any more questions on the chat, I'd like, first of all, to thank our panel members. They've been exceptional, and obviously they've given their time away for free. So thank you very much for this. And before I let everyone go, I was just going to ask Borja to say something about the conference. I'm going to share a screen so we have also some information about the conference.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. There is also one final question to our speakers, so you may ask them after I finish. But yeah, yes, we will be very brief for those of you who are joining us and who may not be familiar. Remember that Sport&EU, we do organize a yearly conference normally towards the start of the summer. So this year conference is on 25th and 26th June. It's going to be hosted by EU Asia Institute at ESCA School of Management in Angers, in the Loire Valley in France. So nice place, nice wine, nice chateaus, nice conference host venue, nice food as well. At Sport&EU, we pride ourselves of one, being a very friendly bunch of people. So come along, you won't be harmed, I'm sure. Andrea is a good Andrea and Kain are good examples of that. But also of being inclusive and also of being quite cheap, which I think it's important nowadays. The conference fee for this year, I think it's 120 euros for 2 days, including meals, 60 euros for the students. So relative, quite good value, we think, and you will hear the latest research on this area. You have there the link for this year's conference. You don't have to present a paper, of course, because the paper selection is already been done, but you can go there, socialize, see the latest research. We are looking to receiving you in Angers. If you are not a member of Sport&EU, you can join us. I've shared in the chat the way in which you can join Sport&EU, the mailing list, and we are really looking forward to see as many as you can, as many as you in Angers on the 25th, 26th of June. There are papers. The conference is also, I have to say, it's interdisciplinary. I have to keep the lawyers at bay normally, but we managed to do that successfully. There will be law, there will be sociology, there will be economics. Yes, Andrea, there will there will be politics, and it will be also and yes, for those, of course, that may be interested into that, we have 3 incredibly talented guest speakers contributing to our conference, and I think it's also it's a first for us, but quite a good statement from our organization is that the 3 keynote speakers, they are all female. They are going to be talking about the Olympics. They are going to be talking about the sport diplomacy. So not only law, not only football, a variety of topics there. So yeah, that's the pitch. Andrea, join us, use the QR. You can still register. We'll welcome you in Angers.
Thank you, Borja. You mentioned that there was one last question. I cannot find it, so if you could help me with that, and then we can free our panel member.
I think it's Roberta, for example, has already answered that. So it's in the Q&A. Alana Richardson says, hi, a very early career researcher here, so not aware about this yet. Further to the conversation about using social media, are there any restrictions from journals, particularly if not open access, about repurposing your work to post in other forms, for example, shorter, less academic or social media? Maybe the embargo you just spoke about applies?
I think that Roberta has replied on the chat. Essentially, you're not republishing; you're changing the nature of the output, and there's a link as to how to promote your publication in a very digestible and reader-friendly way, which is, I think, her own LinkedIn profile.
I assume it's a different output, so copyright does not really apply. But copyright specialist, correct me if I'm wrong.
I only teach intellectual property law, so I'm not an expert.
I think the most important thing to do if you're doing that is make sure that you're saying that there is a longer or previously published version and give the full citation and reference. Make sure that the credit's always given.
And publish it after, not before. So, and yeah, as Mark said, make sure that you link it to the full article. We're interested in increasing our impact factor as much as anybody else. So, this is publicity, this is and the out metrics that Mark talked about already, right? This is pushing traffic to the sites, to the journal, to the output. And therefore that, most journals would welcome it. You're not, as long as you're not taking chunks out of it and cutting and pasting, but if you are redrafting it, you're still the same author, so some words formulations may be similar, but publish it after, and then just be clear about where was it published first and send them there.
And just as already mentioned, you're always allowed to publish the accepted manuscript, not the version of record, but the accepted manuscript on your personal website and LinkedIn and so on. But again, it depends a little bit on the publisher. So make sure what you can publish. Your original manuscript is something you can anyway publish, and some do this also as a working paper up front on some official preprint server, for instance, Elena.
Perfect. Well, once again, I want to thank the members of the panel. You've been very useful. This has been incredibly interesting. The recording of this will be posted online soon. I can also take this chance to remind you that there are other short talks that have been already posted on the website. So if you go on the website, you will find the recording of all of the short talks, including the last one that was about esports and doping. Right. Well, this concludes the session. Very much looking forward to the next short talk. And in the meantime, I hope to see every one of you at the conference in Angers. Thank you very much. See you.